Okay, so this is the second half of the Islamic art lecture where we're going to talk about the later Islamic art. Maybe. Sorry, I don't know why my computer's so slow today. It was being slow on the other one as well. Okay, so last time I gave you a little kind of brief history of the early Islamic religion and the conquest by different Islamic caliphs of different areas in Europe and in the world. So this is a little chart of the different Islamic dynasties and the territories and dates where they ruled. Then we talked about early Islamic art, we talked about the Dome of the Rock, we talked about the Great Mosque of Damascus, we talked about the Malwiya minaret, which is the snail shell minaret. We talked about the Mezquita in Cordoba. We talked about some personal sculptural items, an illuminated Quran, and ceramics. So today we're going to talk about later Islamic art. This isn't going to be quite as long of a lecture, partially because after this, when I talk about Western medieval Europe, kind of some of the other cultures that were prominent at the time, everything eventually sort of goes together and we start seeing how styles are influenced by all of these movements that came earlier in these different periods and empires and things. So let's get into the later Islamic art. So basically in 1192, there's a Muslim army and it's under the command of Muhammad of Ghor, and that army wins a decisive battle at Tarain, and that leads to the 1206 formation of an Islamic sultanate at Delhi in India. Okay, sultans like another kind of ruler. It's like kind of like a king. So we have a sultanate in Delhi at India that's an Islamic sultanate. This eventually becomes the greatest Muslim empire in Asia. So it becomes a very big, very prominent empire. It's called the Mughal Empire, M-U-G-H-A-L Empire. Okay. So the Muslims establish a permanent presence in South Asia. This is huge, very culturally impactful, this kind of thing. But then, right after that, if you've heard of the Mongols, Genghis Khan, those guys, the Mongols who invaded China in 1210 overthrow the caliphs in Central Asia and Persia. So they follow them all the way back to Persia. The Mongols have horses. They come in and are kind of running everybody over, defeating them with these horses. Okay, so Isfahan falls to the Mongols in 1236. Then Baghdad falls in 1258. Then Damascus in Syria falls in 1260. And so these are main cultural centers that we've been looking at in terms of the Islamic art and architectural development at this time in the world. So they take a pretty big hit, right, from the Mongols invading and coming in. This doesn't, however, mean that Islamic art stops developing. Islamic art actually continues to flourish, but we have some new cultural capitals in the later Islamic art world. Things kind of shift around because of these developments. So we have the Nasrids in Spain. We have the Ayyubid and Mamluk in Egypt. We have the Timurids and Safavids in Iran, and we have the Ottomans in Turkey, are some of the new kind of dynasties that really flourish after this time period. Okay, so here's the first thing we're going to look at. This is the point where I pause in my seated class and have people try to tell me what on earth we're looking at here, because it's strange, right? It's a kind of a new form. It's an unusual thing that looks interesting in our eyes. So what you are looking at is the Macarnas Dome in the Hall of the Aben Siraj in the Palace of the Lions at the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. That's a whole lot of lists of things. So what this is we have the star-shaped dome, and within the dome and around the edges leading up into the dome in what are in effect the squinches, we have all these little ceramic shapes. These are called macarnas. We're going to look at them and figure out what they are doing to our eyes, and then we're going to look back at this. So macarnas are tier after tier, so row after row after row of stalactite-like, like in a cave, the stalactite, prismatic forms. So each of these are cast ceramic, and they're tiles, but they're in these really particular little unusual shapes. So if you look closely at them here, you can see that they each stick out and protrude and then go convex into the wall and make all these interesting little shapes. They have particular little glazes and decorations on each of them. And basically they make kind of an optical illusion in some ways. So our eye doesn't quite know what to do with this information, and it makes something very beautiful and very different and very unusual to our eyes. So it's this kind of creating this look that's maybe like we're looking up into the heavens or something, like looking at something that we're not used to seeing that's sort of otherworldly. They're also prismatic in that they're glazed, so light comes in and kind of bounces around off of them. I think they're fascinating. It's a very interesting kind of decorative work that becomes quite popular in the later Islamic architectural and art trends. Okay, so now we've looked at them closely. We've talked about what they actually are physically. Let's look back at this. It's still hard to see. We're looking a little bit from the side up into the dome, but it does interesting things. It's almost like one of my students mentioned this the other day. It's like one of those magic eye puzzles. You'd like try to bring your eyes up and get them out of focus and slowly bring it back till the shape revealed itself. It's because it's basically a totally new art form, right? It's a totally different kind of thing than anything we've seen before. Pretty fascinating. Okay, so while we're here, let me tell you the story behind this and why it is called the Hall of Ibn Siraj. Ibn Siraj is Arabic for saddler's son. The Ibn Siraj were a family that held a prominent position in the Kingdom of Granada in the 15th century. So this is named a little after it's built. So this is built between 1354 and 1391, and the incident that it is named after doesn't happen until a little later. So the legend goes that one of the Ibn Siraj men fell in love, so one of the men from this family, fell in love with a lady of the royal family. And so he comes up here, and this hall, by the way, is in the Palace of the Lions, which is one of many palaces, one of many buildings in what's called the Alhambra. The Alhambra is kind of this big complex that's almost like a fortress or a citadel, and it has all these different buildings. So some of them are religious, some of them are where royal families live. At one point there's over 40,000 people living here. So it's this massive kind of guarded complex. And then within that, there's this Palace of the Lions, where the royal family is living. And so this guy falls in love with one of the ladies of the royal family. Her family is not into it. They're like, no, this is not a guy for you. But he breaks it anyway. And then he starts climbing up to try and sneak into her bedroom window at night, which is kind of brash. He's discovered. And one of the members of the royal family, Ibrahim bin Adin, calls all of the Ibn Sirajas, calls this guy's whole family after catching him, and has them all come up to the Palace of the Lions to meet, and has them come into this hall under the Marcanis dome, and then he shuts them in. He locks them in, and then he calls their team of assassins, and he has the assassins come in and kill them all, kill the whole family. And so that is why this is called the Hall of the Ibn Siraj, because this is where they were all killed. Now, that story has now been disputed. Some scholars say that this massacre is a fiction and this never happened. But it's kind of interesting because we have this hall that's named after this other family that did not live there. So there's this sort of persistent legend that follows it around, which is kind of interesting and strange. Okay, so we see these macarnas. We will see these continue to pop up and be used in different ways throughout this lecture. Okay, so this is the Palace of the Lions. So this is the courtyard of the same structure that domed hallway we were just looking at is in. It's also in the Alhambra, which is in Granada, Spain. So the Nasrids, this is one of the groups that kind of comes to prominence during this time. They are the rulers in Spain from 1232 to 1492. And they construct this huge palace fortress called the Alhambra in Granada. Alhambra literally means the red in Arabic, so it's named for this rose-colored stone that's used for the exterior walls. Within this structure, there are 23 towers, and by the 14th century, the complex had a population of 40,000 people and half a dozen royal residencies, so half a dozen palaces within this structure. So this is just one of them. This is the Palace of the Lions, and it's named after this courtyard where we have this lion fountain. Lions, we've talked about this before, are kind of a symbol of the power of the Arabic people. You'll also notice in the courtyard we have horseshoe arches and the colonnades all around, and then in that center kind of area that sticks out a little more, we have polylobed arches, which we talked about last time in the early Islamic art. So that's, you have an arch, but it has all these other little arches built into it. It almost looks kind of lace-like. It's called polylobe. Okay, what about this? Does this look kind of familiar? If you have seen the lecture on the Byzantine, it should look familiar. So I think this is a pretty fabulous building. It looks very much like Hagia Sophia, right? That's the first thing I think of when I see it. So this is by someone named Sinan the Great. He's not the ruler, he's the architect. So pretty fun name for an architect. He gets the Great after his name. He's the most famous Ottoman architect. And this is in Edirne, Turkey. It's made between 1568 and 1575. And it's called the Mosque of Salam II. And so this is a very beautiful structure. We have this central plan. We have this great dome with a fenestrated drum, like what we see at Hagia Sophia. We have 4 minarets. These minarets are exaggerated in scale. And one of the things that's interesting about these minarets is they're the towers. We talked about this last time. They're the towers that are used for the call to prayer. These are so exaggerated and large that they wouldn't necessarily even be functional from the top levels. So they become also kind of decorative and kind of a symbol of reaching toward the heavens. A lot of people think that these kind of minarets have some influence when we head into the Romanesque period and into the Gothic after that for what's called the West work, which are the towers, the west facing end, the front entrance of churches, of cathedrals. So we start seeing these kind of fancy minarets develop. We see the central plan. Let's look at the inside of this. It's pretty gorgeous. So one of the things, if you think back to the Byzantine lecture that I talked about, was the invention of what's called a squinch. Remember what a squinch is? So the space over here, that's the kind of curved triangle between the 2 arches going up toward the dome. It's kind of like this kind of shape. So that's called a squinch. And remember, that is why there could be all the windows, the fenestration, the windows around the drum, because those were so much more structurally supportive than what had been used before. Okay, so we have these, and you'll notice that these also have macarnas, so those little stalactite type things. They're a little bit more uniform here than what we were looking at Alhambra, but you can see the influence coming over from Spain into this area. So we have the macarnas in our pendentives that are supporting our dome, and then you also see that you have what we looked at in early Islamic structures when we were looking at Cordoba, the great mosque at Cordoba. We have this alternating color pattern, this kind of striping that we associate with Moorish architecture and the Umayyads of Spain. So we see that patterning. We have macarnas, we have the fenestration from Byzantine, we have this dome and central plan that's kind of like Byzantine. So we have all these different influences coming together, right? Okay, you'll notice in the decor, there's a lot of really lovely intertwined calligraphy writing, as we've seen, is one of the prominent kinds of decoration. Okay, so we talked last time about what a mihrab is. So a mihrab in a mosque is what is kind of the focal point for prayer. It shows you which way to face, because you're always supposed to pray towards Mecca. So this focuses. This one has been removed from its mosque. It now exists in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which I've told you about this. They have all these rooms and things that have just been taken from places all over the world. So I've seen this. It's incredibly beautiful in person. And it is originally from Madrasa Imami in Isfahan, Iran. And if you look at this, so we have the influence of the Mosaic coming in the Byzantine, but the way tile work develops in the Islamic artistic traditions is really its own thing. It's a really separate, beautiful kind of artwork where it's mosaic, but it's done in such a precise, particular way, and it's so intricate and has all these geometric patterns and these intricate kinds of detail work. It's really stunning, really beautiful. Tile work isn't just on interiors. We start seeing more and more tile work being done on the exterior of buildings. So this is a lot of mosaic tile work on the minarets of the Qibla Iwan of the Friday Mosque in Isfahan, Iran. This is from the 16th century. So you can see all the tile work on the outside. You can also see in the courtyard all the tile work on the outside. If you look at this minaret, you also notice that we have the mascanas around the outside. So these kind of things that we looked at in Alhambra that were going up inside the dome, that kind of detailing and decor is now being applied to the outside of structures as well. And it, in combination with this brightly colored tile work and the beautiful calligraphy work, is making the exteriors of buildings more and more ornate. Whereas before we were seeing sort of less ornate exteriors and more ornate interiors. Now the exteriors are also ornate. If you look at the courtyard here and look at the entrance, you can see a polylobed arch there, and that polylobed arch is set within a horseshoe arch, with the double horseshoe arches around the exterior or around the courtyard area. This is pretty fantastic and pretty gorgeous. This is another use of these makarnas. This is in an entryway looking up. So again, this is on the exterior of a building. And you can see how they're just getting more and more detailed, more intricate. The way the patterning of the tile work goes along with the shape that's created. It's pretty incredible. I just think I mean, you could look at that forever. This is where that was a closer view of this. It's the entrance portal of the Imam Mosque, formerly the Shah Mosque in Isfahan, Iran. So we see lots of this really beautiful tile work coming out of Iran, particularly Isfahan. The makarnas, again, are on the outside of the building and being extremely decorative and interesting the way they're used. The scale, look at how small the people are, the vivid color. And then just think about all the wide array of shapes. The ceramicist who made all these tiles that make up the makarnas and all this patterning, think about that ceramicist and how they had to figure out all of those shapes and how to fire all those things so that they would all fit together. Pretty incredible stuff. Okay, lastly, I'm just going to touch on this, and then you'll notice in your assignments on Canvas that some of you in this module are writing about Byzantine art and architecture, and some of you are writing about Islamic art and architecture, because they go kind of simultaneous to each other, so they're related. So some of you have topics from Islamic art and some from Byzantine, but I want to end with this carpet. So one of the other things that I think we think about is Persian carpets are a decorative art that's still popular today. And some of this, I think, I relate to Islamic art. I think about carpet weaving. I used to teach fiber art, so that's another part of that. But this is one of a very famous line of carpets, which are the Artabel carpets. They're from Artabel, Iran. This one was woven in 1540. It's wool and silk, and it's 34 feet long. so it's gigantic. It's 34 feet long by 17 feet 7 inches wide. This particular one is now at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, but it's extremely beautiful. And if you think about this, so this is over 200,000 individual knots to weave this thing. So it took a very, very long time, and it's very intricate. And you see how the patterns in the weaving, the way we have this vegetation pattern that's interlacing, the kind of shapes of the forms in here, how this kind of looks like the architecture, right? This is all kind of influenced, everything influences everything else, and it's all in the same kind of design, regardless of what the medium is, whether it's carpet, whether it's ceramic tile, whether it's the architectural elements inside. So we see this kind of signature look of later Islamic art that emerges at this time. Okay, so next time we're going to, let's see, do we have something else here? Oh, we have a couple more things, apologies. So this is, we talked about illuminated manuscripts last time. Sorry, I don't know why I thought that that was my last slide. I'm allergy medicine, my brain is gone. So apologies. Last time we talked a little bit about illuminated manuscripts, and I showed you a gilded page from the Quran in Kulfic calligraphy. So this is another example of an illuminated manuscript. So this is Sultan Muhammad, and it's who made it, painted it, and it's the Court of the Gaimars. So this is folio 20 of the Shahnama. The Shahnama is a important written work. So it's the Persian national epic poem by a Persian writer named Ferdowsi, and it recounts the history of Iran from the creation of the world to the Muslim conquest. So it's a very popular epic poem that tells this whole history. In this book there are 258 illustrations, and they're like this. They're so beautiful and intricately done, and they look kind of abstract and just are incredible. I mean, they're just incredible looking. Unfortunately, this book was broken apart. They were all taken away from each other, and they've been sold separately, which like hurts my heart that happened. But it also speaks to the strength of the artistry of these works, that they were sold as individual masterpieces. But I still am sad that they were taken away from each other. So this is a very interesting kind of different sort of illumination in manuscripts than what we've seen before. It has this kind of fluidity that's really lovely. Okay, this might be my last slide. We'll see. So this one kind of brings everything together in a lot of ways. So this is a canteen, so something that was used to hold liquid. And on it we have episodes from the life of Jesus Christ. This was found in Syria. It's brass with inlaid silver. And it's a really interesting piece. It's the work of an Ayyubid metalsmith who was hired by a Christian pilgrim who was on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land to make this canteen for him. So here we have a Muslim metalsmith who is incorporating scenes from this other religious figure's life, and also incorporating the kind of design motifs and some of the kind of stylistic work that we see in Arabic work, in Muslim work from the time, to show the story of Christ, which is really interesting. And I think it's a good place to end, because it kind of shows this melding and this coming together of all these different influences, right? So I think that is the last slide. Next time I will talk about the early medieval in the West more, talk about the early medieval Vikings and Visigoths, and then talk about early medieval Christians outside of Byzantine and what they were doing. And then we'll, eventually everything will come together. We'll talk about the Romanesque period and then the Gothic period. Okay, thanks.